Okay, so let's now play around with these data types a bit. I'm on my MongoDB server again, and I dropped all existing databases. You can, by the way, always do that by switching to the database, like test if I had that database here, and then executing drop database, db.drop database. And this will get rid of the database if you have it. But let me now clear the screen, and let's now use a new database, companies, or company data maybe. And in there, let's say I have a companies collection. And in that companies collection, I now want to insert one new company. And my idea here is that for this company, I want to showcase some of these data types. So that company will probably have a name, and that name will be some text. Now, as you learned, the text is enclosed in quotation marks, and you can, by the way, use double or single quotation marks here. This does not matter. That is the case in the shell here, because the shell is based on JavaScript. For the programming language you're using with the MongoDB driver, that might differ, of course. So here, let's give this any name, like Fresh Apples Inc. It's a company I just came up with. And now with that company name added here, what else could we add? Well, let's say this company is a startup, and therefore we add a is startup key here. And this simply is, well, true. So here I'm using a Boolean because the case or the question, whether this is a startup or not, can be answered with yes or no. And translated to a Boolean, that would be true or false. Here it's yes, so it's true. Now, besides that being a startup, let's also log its number of employees. And I'll add 33 here. So this is a number, and this is actually an integer, you would think at least. Now, the shell which I'm using here is based on JavaScript, and JavaScript doesn't differentiate between integers and floating point numbers. This would be a floating point number, by the way. So this will actually be stored as a double or float in MongoDB, not as this number decimal special high precision thing I mentioned on the slide, but a normal floating point number with some imprecision on the decimal places. Now, that might be fine. And for now, let's simply store it like that. Let's also add a funding here, and let's store a very large number there. And I'll actually store a number which is easy to remember by just sliding over my numbers twice. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, and then again. Let's also add an embedded document here, details maybe. And there we could simply have any additional data we want, like CEO, Mark, Super, obviously a good name for the CEO. And let's also add a list. Tags maybe. That is an array. You always add an array by using square brackets. And there, in turn, we can add any value we want. So this can hold multiple string values like super, perfect, whatever you want. It could also hold numbers, and all the values in the array are just separated by commas. Or it could, of course, also hold other nested documents. So this could hold other documents with tags which are, well, basically documents with a title that then holds the value. So whatever your application needs is possible. You're really flexible here. So here I go for the embedded document in an array style. Now, besides these values, we also learned about dates and timestamps. So if we also add the founding date here, we can construct a new date in the shell by calling new date. And if we add it like this, it will take the current date. And I will indeed do that here. We can also add a timestamp, like inserted at, to give that a clear timestamp when this data was inserted by calling new timestamp. Now, these are functions, new date and new timestamp, that are provided by the shell. There are equivalents in the drivers for the different programming languages though, and you'll find the exact methods you need to call in the driver docs. Here, for example, I'm on the page of the MongoDB Node.js driver, and there I can click on the reference of the latest release, and of course such release references are available for all drivers. And in the documentation for the driver, you find detailed instructions on installation and how to use it, and you should also find an API documentation, which is simply a list of all the features that are included. And in there, for example, you also find long and int32 that will be useful methods or objects when working with these values. And you also will find something that helps you with a timestamp, for example. So down there, if you click on timestamp, you open the timestamp doc and you'll learn how you can create a timestamp in that Node.js driver. So there, by calling new timestamp after importing the timestamp from this MongoDB driver. And more information on that and how to use that driver and so on can, as I mentioned before, be found in the general driver docs, like the tutorials here, the quick start, or the general reference here. So that is how you can use these types you'll learn about here in the shell in your driver too. So the shell here is based on JavaScript, therefore here we actually do use new timestamp to create a timestamp. And with that, for now, I added all the data I want to add. If I now hit enter, this gets inserted. And now let's have a look at it by finding one company, so the one we just added. And here we see that company was added. We see the data we added. We see, for example, for the date, we got this ISO date object with the current date I'm recording this at as a value entered here. You see it uses the year, month, day format, then a T to separate the time from the date, and then we got the time in a 24-hour format stored here. The set at the end marks the time zone for which this time is logged. You also see that timestamp object, and as I mentioned, this is actually a timestamp based on the current time in milliseconds, and also it has an ordinal component, so that if I were to insert two elements simultaneously with insert many, they would have different timestamps. Now, one super interesting thing can be seen if we have a look at funding. There you see that the number that is stored is actually not the number that I added. If I scroll up a bit, you see that for funding I did add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0 twice essentially. So I rolled over the keyboard twice. But the number that was stored is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then it's essentially nullified or cut off, you could say. The reason for that is that I tried to store a number that was too big, because the normal number JavaScript accepts is essentially a 64-bit floating point value, and that could not be stored here. And that is a restriction you can face when working with numbers. If you need to store super big numbers, you'll have to store them separately, maybe as a string. Now, speaking of numbers, you saw some general values here on the company. Now let me get a little bit more abstract so that I can show you what's up with these numbers. And I have a whole module where I also talk about numbers and how to work with number data. But for now, let me quickly add some dummy data. I'll use a new collection for this, numbers, and this will be one of the rare cases where I'll just use an abstract example. I'll insert one document here, A1. Now, if I insert it like this, obviously if I access numbers and I find one element, we see it here. Now, one interesting thing can be seen if I now use db stats. Stats is a utility method provided by the shell which outputs some, stats about this database. Here we see like how many collections we got in there, how many objects, and we also see the average object size. Now, I got two collections in there, so let me quickly get rid of the companies collection by calling drop on the collection. Like drop database gets rid of a database, drop on a collection gets rid of that database. If I now repeat stats, we see there's only one collection in there, and we get a data size, an average data size of 33. Now remember that value of 33 here. Now I will use my numbers collection and delete all elements, so the one element I got in there. If I now execute db stats, we obviously see data size 0 because there's nothing in there. Now let me repeat that insert one command here, but I'll not insert a number like this, which remember is stored as a 64-bit floating point number by default, but I'll use a special method provided by the shell, and you find equivalents in your driver docs when working with a driver, which will create an int32 value instead of that default 64-bit floating point number. And if I store the same number, 1, now with this helper function, and I repeat my stats output, you see that it shrank a bit. And this is one of the reasons why you could consider using these special values provided by MongoDB, because you're able to manage your data size a bit more efficiently. Now, it's also worth pointing out that this was only stored as this 64-bit floating point number because the shell is based on JavaScript, and JavaScript doesn't differentiate between integers and floats. Other languages do. So for other languages, this might not be the case if you accessed your database through their driver and added a number there. For the shell, it is, however. And this is good because here I can show you the difference between the default number, the float, and this integer. You can also check the type of a value as it is stored in MongoDB by using the type of command which is provided in the shell. There I can access numbers, find one to get that one element I have, and then access the A key with .a. And we see the type here is number. Now, I don't want to go too in-depth into that whole number thing, also because it has a lot to do with computing in general and not so much with MongoDB, but I found this important to highlight that you have these different formats. Often it might not matter, and the default which is stored might work for you. Like for all the numbers we used thus far for ages or prices, we can just enter the number and it will get stored in the database. The sizing difference might not really matter for us. The extra precision we could get on the decimal places will also not matter for only 2 or 3 decimal places. So there we will be fine with the defaults. I want you to be aware of the general set of data types you have, and that there are specialized data types for specialized kind of operations you might plan. You should also not miss the BSON types document, to which you find a link in the last lecture of this module, where you can learn more about the general data types MongoDB knows and how it can store data in its database, and where you can then also learn more about some of the special data types like object ID or timestamps, and which in general is a great backup if you want to dive deeper into a specific data type or learn more about a specific data type.